Unit selection! We have our units, we have the grid. Now the next step is to take the unit and put it on the grid. But right now we don't really have a way to select which unit type we want to put on the grid. Sure, we can use a basic combo box, but that's not really pretty, and I think that will be interesting to take a bit of time just to make something that is a little bit better and that we can reuse somewhere else in the game later on. So let's get to it. So here the first step is to import our assets. So first I have a few icons for all my units, and then I have a background for the buttons, so they are a little bit better. First, we're going to start with the unit, so I'm going to take all the icons one by one and drop them into the proper folder. So the bat inside the bat, chicken in the chicken, priest in the priest, ranger in the ranger, slime, slime, and then warrior, warrior. And finally, for the background, I'm just going to create myself a new folder in the texture folder right here. So new folder, I'm going to name it the UI for the UI elements of the game, and then I'm going to drag my button inside the UI. And now we can save all, and that's it for the import of the asset. And now the next step is to associate all our textures. So all the textures unit icon right here, we have to associate them with the right unit type, the same way we did for the skeletal mesh and the animation blueprint. So we were doing that inside the unit. So I'm gonna go back in core units and open my BP unit to see how we did that. And we did it in the construction script right here, which works fine, but I think it will be better to move all that inside the data table, because let's say right now we have a skeletal mesh, an animation blueprint, now we are going to have an icon, then we might have some sounds asset, we might have some VFX or stuff proper to that specific unit, so it's better if we move all that inside a data table. It's going to be simpler to assign, and then everything else in the game will be able to access it super easily. But to do that, we're gonna need a few structures, so I'm gonna go back in entry and I'm going to create a new folder in my units folder. So I'm going to name it utilities. Then inside the folder, I'm going to create two structures. So blueprint structure and blueprint structure, like that. I named the first one s_unit data because it's going to contain the data of the whole unit, so everything. And then I have another one for this asset specifically. So I named it s_unit data_assets, which this one is only going to contain the assets. And then we're going to put that second one inside the first one. That way, everything is going to be organized. But for now, let's open them both. So this one and that one. And here on the right, in the asset structure, I created three variables. One for the mesh, one for the anim blueprint, and one for the icon. The mesh is a skeletal mesh object, the anim blueprint is an anim instance class, and the third one, the icon, is a texture 2D. And on the left, in the unit data structure, I have two variables. The first one is the type, so the unit type, that's it. And then I have the asset structure right there. So as a unit data asset, so it contains all the variables of the second structure. So right here, I can collapse them and show them if I want to. We can now close them and go back in entry. And we can now create the data table. So right click, misc data table. And for the structure, we're gonna use the parent structure. So s unit data. Let's press OK. And I named it dt_default unit data per type. And now we can open it. And here we're going to create one row for each of our units. So I have a few rows. The first row is going to be for the warrior, so I'm going to rename it warrior. Then the unit type is going to be warrior. The mesh is going to be the warrior mesh. The anim blueprint of the warrior, and finally the icon, we're gonna take the icon of the warrior. Here we go. And now we're gonna do the same thing with all the other ones. So that one's gonna be the ranger. We can rename the row for ranger. The assets are gonna be for the ranger, so ranger, the anim blueprint of the ranger right here, and then the icon of the ranger right there. And now I'm gonna do the same thing for all the other ones. Here we go, so now I'm done. I have my row for the warrior, which has all the assets of the warrior, then the ranger, same thing, the ranger's asset, the priest, then I have my slime, I have the chicken, and finally I have my bat right here with all its assets. Perfect, we can save and close that one too. And now to access the data inside the data table, I'm just going to use a function library. So right click, blueprint, blueprint function library. I can name it BFL_units. And open it to create the function. I name the function getDefaultUnitData from unit type, and I'm passing it a unit type right here. And then I'm returning a unit data at the end. To pass the unit type inside the row name, we have to first convert it to a string, so to string on the enum to string right here, and then we can pass it inside the name like so. And now we can compile and close that one. And actually we're gonna go back in the unit because we're gonna use it right here. And to do that, we can simply call the new function, so get the default unit data from unit type, then pass it the unit type and break the result. Break, and then we can break the assets to access the assets inside it, so the mesh, right here and the anim blueprint like that. And now we can delete those to select node and realign everything so it's a little bit cleaner. Here we go, now I can compile and go see if it still works in my level. So now I have my units right here, so I can just zoom on them, and if I select them and just change their unit types, we can see that they still change as before. Perfect, it's all good now. Well, we can finally go do the buttons. So I'm gonna go back in my units folder to create another folder. This one I'm gonna name it widget and open the folder. Inside it, I will create a widget, so widget blueprint, which I'm gonna name button_unit and open it. And here I'm starting with two basic components. So I have my first component, which is a button. I named it button_unit. And then I have an image inside the button, which is image_unit icon. And now just so we can see better, I'm just going to make it desired instead of fill screen here in the top right corner, like so. So now we can focus on what's happening. And now I'm going to select my image, go in the brush and set an image to it. So we can scroll here, I'm gonna find one of my unit icon, doesn't really matter which one we're using. Okay, it's pretty big. Okay, here we go. We now have an image on the button. And since we're here, I'm just going to add a little bit of padding, let's say 5 padding. Doesn't really matter either, perfect. And now if we go on the button, I think it would be nice to change the color of the button itself. So I'm gonna go here, the background color, I will make it a tint of gray, I think, like so. And now for the shape of the button, I want to use the same texture we just imported at the beginning. So I'm gonna go in style here in normal, we can select an image, and I think it's going to be a little bit annoying to find it. So I'm just going to find it once, button background, here you go, I can select it. Then what I can do is click on the looking glass right there, so it selects it in the content browser. And now for the other ones, because we have to change the normal, overt, press and disable, we can just expand them and click on the little arrow right there. So it's going to apply it automatically because it's selected in the content browser. So here we go, like so. So now we have a button with a little bit of rounded corners like that. Okay, we're done with the initial setup of the button. Now we're just going to go in the graph to add a little bit of logic in there. We're not going to use the construct and the event tick, so I'm just going to delete them, and we're just going to use the pre-construct. And here I'm using the same code we used in the BP unit, but this time to set the brush on the image, to set the unit icon properly based on the unit type that we select. So we're just going to set it like that. And for the unit type, I'm just going to promote it to a variable. So right click, promote to variable, which I'm gonna name unit type. And then we can click on the little eye icon right here just to expose it in the editor like so. So now we can compile and go back in the designer, and now if I select my root, my button right here, I should be able to change the unit type based on the type we select right here. So here we go, we now have some nice icons changing based on the type, perfect. And now just for fun right here, I created myself a new variable. This one is a boolean, and it is also instance editable in the editor right here with the little eye icon. And what I'm doing is I'm using that boolean to detect if I want to look right or left with my unit icon. So here from my unit icon, I'm setting the render scale to either -1 or 1, depending if I want to look right or left. And now if I go back in the designer to see how it looks, here we go, I can select my unit right here. And now if I click on the checkbox, we can see that the unit looks right, left, right, left, right, left. And now same thing for the slime, priest and everything. They should all work perfectly. Perfect, great. And the last thing I want to do for this button is to add a way to mark this button as selected, to select the button so the user see that this button is selected. That way, if we have multiple buttons with different units, the user can select the unit he wants, and then it's going to display which one is selected and deselect all the other ones. And to do that, I'm going to add a border around the selected button. So what I'm going to do is right click on button unit, and I'm going to use wrap with border right here. And now we can see that we have a border around the button. The border is a little bit square in the corner, so I'm just going to use the same image that we used for the button. So I'm going to select the border, go in the brush right here and apply my texture. We can see that it's a bit broken and it doesn't align properly. So to fix that, I'm just going to change the draw as right here. Instead of an image, I'm going to choose a box, and for the margin, I will change it to 0.25, which is the same thing as the button is using. Then two other things. First, the padding right here, we can see that it's not the same padding on the left and at the top. So what I'm gonna do is just replace it by 5, so it's 5 everywhere, like so. And then we can change the tint of the color of my border, because white, it's a little bit ugly, so I'm just going to make it a little bit blue, like so. So here are my values. And now, since we want to be able to change the opacity of the border, so it's visible when the unit is selected and it's hidden when the unit is not, what we have to do is first rename the border, so it's border underscore is selected right here in my case, and second check the is variable checkbox in the top right corner right here. That way we're going to be able to access that border inside the graph, which we're going to do right now. So here first I created two new things. I created a new event, which is event underscore set is selected, receiving a boolean named is selected, and then using that boolean I'm setting a variable which is named is selected also, and I made it instance editable right here. That way we can also set it in the editor. And then, if it is selected, we're gonna change the brush color, so the color of the brush, which is the brush color right here that we have right here, so we can change that on top of the tint. And what we're doing is either setting it to white, which is all visible and everything, or all the way transparent for the alpha right here. The alpha either 0 or 1, and that's what we're gonna do right here. So here, when it's true, we're making it white, completely 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 everywhere. And when it's false, well, it's still white. Oh no, it's black this time, but doesn't matter. It's 0, 0, 0 everywhere. The only one that matters is the alpha, because that's the only thing that really matters. And now to test it, I'm just going to take the set selected event, put it right here, connect it at the end of the pre-construct, and pass it my is selected variable like so. And now if I go back in my designer, I should be able to compile and go change the value of my checkbox like that to see that the borders either appear or disappear depending if the unit is selected or not. Perfect, it works as expected. And the last thing we want to do with this button is to add a way to notify the owner of the button when this button gets clicked. So what I'm going to do is first implement the button onClicked event. So I'm going to select my button and implement the event like so. I have it right here. And then I'm going to create an event dispatcher, which I'm going to call when this button gets clicked. So I renamed the event dispatcher for onUnit button clicked, and I've also added an input variable right here which I named button, and it is of type button unit. That way the place that receives the callback is going to know which button sends it. So now I can just call that callback right here like so, and for the button variable we can just pass it self, because this is the button that was clicked, it was self, so we can simply pass it to the owner of the callback. Okay, good, we're now done with this button, but now we're gonna go create another widget. A widget that will contain multiple buttons in it. That way we're gonna have a list of units displayed on screen, so let's say I have 3 units, and I can select one of them. So that's what we're gonna go do. So go back in entry and create another widget. So user interface, widget blueprint. I named it button list underscore unit because it's a list of button, and we can open it. And here, since I want my list of buttons to be aligned horizontally, I'm just going to replace the canvas panel by an horizontal box. So replace with the horizontal box. I renamed it hbox underscore units, and I will make sure to also make it a variable here in the top right corner with the checkbox. And now what we could do is simply take our buttons and drop them inside the box and then change the unit type if we want to, but I think it will make way more sense to just spawn them dynamically in the game. That way, if we add more units in the future, they are going to be automatically added inside the box. So that's what we're gonna do inside the graph. And that's how we're going to do that. So in the pre-construct, we start by clearing the children of the horizontal box. That way, if we already add some stuff in there, it's going to be empty and fresh and clean. And then we're looping through all of our unit types, so that way if we add multiple other unit types in the future, they are still going to work and be added automatically inside the box. Then we create a widget. This is the create a widget function, and we can select here the button unit that we created, so button unit. And then that function creates a button for us, and we just have to add it inside the horizontal box like so. And now if we go back in the designer, we should see a difference. Yep, we now have 6 buttons because we have 6 unit types, so we have 6 buttons in the horizontal box. But right now they are all warriors, and it is because we're never setting the unit type on the buttons when we are spawning them, so that's what we're gonna do. And to do that, we're gonna expose all the variables we need when we spawn the button. That way, when we are creating the widget right here in the create widget button, it's going to add all the options we need right there. And to do that, I'm gonna go back in the button unit, select all my variables that I want to expose. So unit type here I can expose it to spawn, then is looking right, expose and spawn, and selected, expose and spawn. And now if I compile and go back in my button list, I should now see all my options in my create widget function right here. which means that we can now pass it the value of the enum right here from the for each loop, and then compile and go see in the designer to see that all the units are now different because they are all using different value of the enums passed by the for each loop right here. And same thing, if we want to edit the is looking right, I'm just going to promote it inside a variable, which I'm gonna name the same way, so is looking right. I'm going to make it instance editable by checking the little eye icon, and then I'm gonna go in the designer to see that we can toggle that checkbox, so all the units are either looking right or left, right, left, perfect. And for the is selected right here, we want to be able to select a unit by default, and to do that I'm going to create a new variable. It is a variable of type eUnitType, and I named it UnitType to select on construct, and I also made it instance editable. And then I simply connected it like so. So while we are looping through the for each loop, we are comparing to see if the unit type of the for each loop is equal to the unit type that we have in our variable, and if it's true, well, we are going to select that unit. So that should work. Let's compile and go see. Now I'm gonna back in the designer, and we can see that we have the border on the first unit, and if we change the unit type, we should see that it selects the right unit. Perfect! And now the last thing we have to do is to handle the button clicks in this blueprint right here, because we have a callback in the unit right here. We have a callback that is called when we are clicking on the button, but now we have to hook ourselves to that callback right here. And to do that, I'm gonna drag from the button we just created and search for assign, and we have just one option, which is the assign on unit button clicked, that we can just connect right here at the end like so. And I'm going to move my event all the way at the beginning just like that, and I'm going to disconnect it just to replace it by a create event, just so it's cleaner. So create event right here. I'm going to select my event, and I'm actually going to rename it to remove the event underscore 0 at the end, just like that. And now I can select my event like so. So now when the button is clicked, it's going to call the callback, which is going to also call that event right here. And now we're gonna save the button inside a variable, so we can know at any time which button is selected. So promote to variable, which I'm gonna name selected button. But here, since we don't want to be able to select the same button over and over and over by clicking on it multiple times, I'm just adding a condition right here. So I'm checking if the button that we just clicked on is the same as the selected button. So if they are not the same, well, we are going to set the new selected button. Otherwise, we're not gonna do anything. And then we can simply tell the button that it is now selected, so it's going to show the blue border. But right now, when we are clicking on a button, we're not deselecting the previous button, which means that in the end, we're gonna have multiple buttons with the blue border around them. So what we're gonna do is just deselect the previous button first. So let's do that right here, and we're gonna deselect it. Here we go. So now if the buttons are not the same, we are deselecting the previous button, selecting the new button, and then telling the button that it is now selected. And at the end of that, I'm just going to add another callback. That way we can notify the place where this button list is that a new button was just selected. So I named the callback unselected unit button changed, and then I'm passing it a button unit as input variable, which I named the selected button. And then I just connected it like so at the end right here. So we are calling the callback, passing it the new selected button that we just clicked. And now I just did the last thing we had to do in this blueprint, and it is to set the selected button by default in the construct. So when we are creating our buttons, we have to set the value of the selected button variable. Otherwise, here it's going to make an error the first time it runs. So if we want it to work, we're gonna need to set the variable right here. And to set it, we're just going to do the same check that we're doing right here to set the is selected border on the button. We're gonna use the same condition, but pass it inside a branch right here. And if it's true, well, we are setting the selected button right there. That way, now this variable is going to be initialized properly when this blueprint is created. Perfect, we're done here. Now let's go add this widget inside a tab just to see how it looks in game. So I'm gonna go in entry and go in my tabs, debug menu, tabs, and I will open, let's say, tab pathfinding. And now what we can do is take the button list unit and drop it inside the widget somewhere, right here, it doesn't really matter. Okay, it's a bit big, so we're gonna just fix that real quick in the button list unit. And the way I'm fixing it is by adding some other components as parent of the horizontal box that contains all the units. The first component I'm going to add is a scale box, so I'm going to right click on it, wrap with, and choose a scale box right here. So it makes that the units are now square instead of weird rectangular shapes. And I will actually select the scale box and change the stretch mode to scale to fit X right here. And then we're gonna add another component, so wrap width again, and this time is going to be a size box right here. That way we can change the size of the widget, so we can specify a new size. And what I'm gonna do is just check the width override checkbox right here and not write anything in the value right there. That way it's going to force it to be the smallest possible. And now if I compile and go back in my tab pathfinding, we can see that the units are now aligned properly with the rest of the widget. And that's also the case if we, let's say, change it to fill screen right here, and we change the width of the widget right there, we can see that the units are now scaling with the size of the widget. That way, if the widget is super big, the units are going to be big, otherwise it's going to be super small, like that. Perfect. So it seems to fix the problem, and we now have our unit list in the widget, and we can now go test it to see if it works. But before going to test it, I'm just going to also implement the callback right here. So I'm going to select my unit box and go all the way at the bottom and implement the event right here with the little plus icon. And we now have the callback right there. And what I'm going to do is just a print to make sure that it works. So print string, from the selected button, we can check for the type. So unit type like so, and we can pass it inside the print string. That way it's going to print a new unit type every time we click on the button. And now let's go see how it looks in game. So let's go play, and I'm gonna go in the pathfinding tab. I have all my buttons right here, and now if I click on my buttons, okay, warrior, ranger, priest, it doesn't really show in the top left corner because we already have some text there, but right here in the log we can see that it works. So if I click on my warrior, it selects the warrior, ranger, slime, chicken, bat, yeah. It seems to work. All the units are now selected and we can see them perfectly. It seems a little bit small right here, but yeah, if we are in full screen, it makes more sense. We can click on the unit bar and it seems to work perfectly also. Great. And the nice thing about this is that if we need multiple of those bars with multiple different units selected at the same time, we can just do that. So we can add this component multiple times like so, and all of them are completely independent. So now if I go back in the level and let's say I go in my pathfinding, I can now select a different unit for each unit list bar like that. So that way we can implement those everywhere in the game and they are not going to be dependent with each other. So yeah, I guess that's gonna be it for today's video. In the next one, we're gonna use that little bar right there to select which unit we want to spawn on the grid. Sure, we could have used a combo box instead, but I personally think that this bar right here is way more interesting than a combo box, and that's why we spent a little bit more time just to set that up, and now we can use it everywhere in the game if we want to. Anyway, that's gonna be it for today, so I'm gonna see you in the next one, so bye bye!